The stagecoach lurched over a rut in the road, and Caroline Hartwell pressed her gloved hand against the window frame to steady herself, watching the endless expanse of Kansas prairie roll past like an ocean of golden grass beneath the impossibly blue sky of late May 1877. She had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago with nothing but 2 trunks, her late mother's pearl necklace, and a teaching contract for the small town of Abilene. At 22 years old, Caroline had never imagined she would travel so far from everything she knew, but after her father's business failed and he drank himself into an early grave, she had few choices left. The advertisement in the Philadelphia Inquirer had promised room, board, and $30 a month to teach at the newly established schoolhouse in a growing cattle town. It was not the life she had envisioned for herself, surrounded by the fine things and cultured society she had known, but it was honest work and a fresh start where no one knew about her family's disgrace. The driver called out that they would stop soon to rest the horses, and Caroline felt relief wash over her. The journey had been punishing, and her fashionable traveling dress, though practical by Philadelphia standards, felt suffocating in the prairie heat. She reached up to adjust her bonnet, a beautiful creation of pale blue silk with white ribbons that had been her mother's. It was one of the few precious things she had kept, and she wore it not just for protection from the sun, but as a connection to happier times. When the stagecoach finally stopped at her ramshackle station that consisted of little more than a wooden structure and a corral, Caroline stepped down carefully, grateful to stretch her legs. The wind hit her immediately, stronger than any breeze she had ever felt in the city, carrying with it the scent of grass and dust and something wild she could not name. She walked a short distance from the coach, trying to work the stiffness from her limbs, and lifted her face to the wind despite knowing it was unladylike. That was when the gust came, sudden and powerful, catching her bonnet and yanking it from her head before she could react. Caroline gasped and reached for it, but the wind had already carried it several yards away, tumbling it across the prairie like a child's toy. Without thinking, she gathered her skirts and started after it, but the wind was faster, pushing the bonnet further and further into the endless grass. She had gone perhaps 50 yards when she realized how foolish this was, chasing a bonnet across open land in her city shoes, but she could not bear to lose it. It meant too much. Caroline pressed on, breathing hard, watching helplessly as the bonnet danced just out of reach. She had nearly given up when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats behind her. A rider passed her at a gallop, and Caroline stopped, shielding her eyes against the sun to watch. The horse was a magnificent bay, and the man who rode it moved with the kind of easy grace that spoke of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He leaned low as he rode, reaching down, and in one smooth motion he scooped the bonnet from the grass without even slowing his horse. Caroline stood frozen, chest heaving from her futile chase as the rider turned his mount and trotted back toward her. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting, curling slightly over his collar. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, dusty trousers, a worn shirt, a leather vest, and a bandana around his neck. His hat had seen better days, and his boots were scuffed from hard use. But it was his face that caught her attention when he finally stopped his horse a few feet away and dismounted. He had strong features, a straight nose and eyes that were an unexpected shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean she had left behind. He held out her bonnet, and Caroline noticed his hands were calloused and scarred from ranch work. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, as if he was not much used to talking. "You dropped this, ma'am." Caroline reached for the bonnet, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. "Thank you so much, I thought it was lost for certain." The cowboy did not quite meet her eyes, and a faint color rose in his cheeks above the line where his hat usually protected his face from the sun. "Glad I could help." He stood there for a moment, shifting his weight, and Caroline noticed he held his hat in his other hand, as if he had remembered his manners at the last second. Then he gave her what could only be described as a shy grin, quick and a little crooked, before he ducked his head. "You should not wander too far from the station, ma'am. Easy to get turned around out here." "I will remember that," Caroline said, surprised by how much that simple smile had affected her. There was something genuine about it, something she had not seen in the calculating faces of the young men in Philadelphia society. "I am Caroline Hartwell. I am on my way to Abilene to teach school." The cowboy looked up again, and this time he did meet her eyes just for a second. "James Corrigan." "Most folks call me Corrigan. I work at the Double R Ranch about 20 miles north of Abilene." He gestured toward the stage station. "I should get you back before your coach leaves." "Oh, goodness, yes," Caroline said, suddenly remembering she had wandered quite far. She could see the station in the distance, but it looked much smaller than she had realized. Corrigan whistled softly and his horse trotted over. Without asking, he held out his hand to her. "Quicker if you ride." Caroline hesitated. She had never ridden a horse in her life, let alone sitting behind a cowboy on his working mount, but she could see he was right about the distance. "All right," she said, and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and steady as he helped her place her foot on his and lifted her up behind the saddle as if she weighed nothing. Caroline settled herself as modestly as possible, acutely aware of how close she was to him, how she had to hold onto his waist to keep her balance. She could feel the warmth of him even through his shirt and vest, and smell the scent of leather and horses and clean sweat. Corrigan mounted in front of her with easy athleticism, and Caroline tightened her grip as the horse started forward at a walk. "You all right back there?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Yes," Caroline managed, though her heart was beating fast for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you again, Mr. Corrigan." "Just Corrigan is fine," he said. "No need for Mr." They rode in silence for a moment, and Caroline found herself studying the back of his head, the way his hair curled at his collar, the breadth of his shoulders. She had known him for perhaps 5 minutes, and yet there was something about him that drew her attention in a way she could not quite explain. Perhaps it was the novelty of this new world she was entering, so different from everything she had known, or perhaps it was something else entirely. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, wanting to hear his voice again. "All my life," Corrigan replied. "Born at the Double R, my father came out here after the war, claimed land, and started raising cattle. He passed 3 years back. Now it is just me and my brother running the place." "I am sorry about your father," Caroline said softly. Corrigan was quiet for a moment. "Thank you. He was a good man. Taught me everything I know about horses and cattle." He paused. "What brings a Philadelphia lady all the way out to Abilene?" Caroline was surprised. "How did you know I was from Philadelphia?" She could hear the smile in his voice. "Your accent, and the way you are dressed. We do not see many bonnets like that out here." "I suppose I will learn to adapt," Caroline said, feeling a little self-conscious about her city clothes. "As for why I came, I needed work and a fresh start. Both my parents are gone now, and there was nothing keeping me in Philadelphia." "That is hard," Corrigan said, and she could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "But Abilene is a good town, growing fast with the cattle drives coming through. You will like it well enough, I think." They had reached the station, and Caroline could see the driver checking the harness on the horses, preparing to leave. Corrigan dismounted and reached up to help her down, his hands steady on her waist as he lifted her to the ground. For just a moment they stood very close, and Caroline looked up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," she said again, feeling like the words were inadequate. "You have been very kind." Corrigan stepped back and put his hat on, shading his eyes. "Welcome to Kansas, Miss Hartwell. I hope you find what you are looking for in Abilene." He gave her that shy grin again, touched the brim of his hat, and turned to mount his horse. Caroline watched him ride away, her bonnet clutched in her hands until he was just a speck on the horizon. She did not know why, but she felt certain that this would not be the last time she would see James Corrigan. The remainder of the journey to Abilene passed in a blur. Caroline could not stop thinking about the cowboy who had chased down her bonnet, about his quiet voice and unexpected kindness, about the way her heart had skipped when he smiled. She told herself she was being foolish, that she was simply overwhelmed by the strangeness of everything, but the feeling persisted. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Abilene as the sun was setting, Caroline pressed her face to the window to get her first look at her new home. The town was larger than she had expected, with a wide main street lined with wooden buildings. A general store, a bank, several saloons, a hotel, and various other establishments. Cattle pens lined the railroad tracks, and she could see cowboys moving among the animals, hear their shouts and the lowing of the cattle. It was noisy and dusty and utterly foreign to her, but there was an energy to it, a sense of life and possibility. The stage stopped in front of the hotel, and Caroline gathered her things, stepping down into the street. A woman was waiting there, tall and slim with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple dark dress and a white apron, and her face was kind but weathered by the prairie sun. "Miss Hartwell?" the woman asked, stepping forward. "I am Martha Dawson. I run the boarding house where you will be staying. Welcome to Abilene." Caroline felt a rush of relief at the friendly greeting. "Thank you, Mrs. Dawson. It is good to finally be here." Martha smiled and gestured to a young man standing nearby with a wagon. "Tom here will take your trunks. Come along and I will show you to your room. You must be exhausted from your journey." The boarding house was a two-story structure on a quieter side street, painted white with blue shutters and a neat front porch. Inside, it was clean and comfortable, with simple but well-maintained furniture and the smell of cooking food. Martha led Caroline upstairs to a small room with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. "It is not fancy," Martha said, "but the bed is comfortable and the sheets are clean. Supper is in an hour if you would like to come down and meet the other boarders." "Thank you," Caroline said, looking around the room that would be her home. It was indeed simple, but after weeks of travel, it looked like paradise. "This is perfect." After Martha left, Caroline unpacked a few essentials and washed the dust of travel from her face and hands. She changed into a fresh dress and brushed out her hair, pinning it back up neatly. As she worked, she found her thoughts drifting back to Corrigan, to the way he had chased down her bonnet without hesitation, to his shy smile and gentle manner. She wondered if she would see him again, and was surprised by how much she hoped the answer would be yes. Supper was a lively affair. The other boarders included a bank clerk, an older widow who helped Martha run the boarding house, and two young men who worked at the general store. They were curious about the new schoolteacher from Philadelphia, and Caroline found herself answering dozens of questions about her journey and her plans. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and by the time she returned to her room, she felt less anxious about her decision to come west. The next morning, Martha walked with her to the schoolhouse, a new building at the edge of town with whitewashed walls and rows of desks inside. The school board had hired Caroline to teach the growing number of children in Abilene, and she would start classes in 2 days, after the weekend. "You will have about 20 students," Martha explained as they toured the empty classroom. "Ages 6 to 14, though some of the older boys only come when there is no work to be done on their family farms or ranches. You will find the children are eager to learn, but many have had little formal education." Caroline looked around the classroom, feeling both nervous and excited. "I will do my best to teach them well." "I am sure you will," Martha said warmly. "Now you have the weekend to settle in and prepare. The mercantile should have any supplies you need, and there is a church service tomorrow morning if you would like to attend. It is a good way to meet more of the townspeople." Caroline did attend church the next morning, sitting in the back of the small building and listening to the sermon while studying the congregation. There were ranchers and their families, townspeople, a few cowboys who looked uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. She did not see Corrigan and tried to tell herself the disappointment she felt was unreasonable. After the service, she was introduced to what felt like half the town. The mayor, a jovial man named Samuel Porter, welcomed her enthusiastically. The owner of the general store, Harold Thompson, told her she had an account there for school supplies. Parents shook her hand and told her about their children. It was overwhelming but heartening, and Caroline began to feel like she might actually belong here. Monday morning arrived, and with it, her first day as a teacher. Caroline woke early, dressed carefully in a practical blue dress, and arrived at the schoolhouse an hour before classes were to begin. She had spent the weekend preparing lessons and organizing the classroom, and now she stood at the front of the room, watching through the window as families began to arrive. The children came in shy groups, eyeing her curiously. She greeted each one, learned their names, assigned them seats. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds to strapping 14-year-old boys who were nearly as tall as she was. When everyone was settled, Caroline took a deep breath and began. "Good morning. I am Miss Hartwell, and I will be your teacher. I know some of you have not had much schooling before, and that is all right. We are going to learn together, and I promise to do my best to make it interesting." The first day was chaotic but not disastrous. She taught basic arithmetic to the younger children, reading to the middle group, and grammar to the older students. By the time she dismissed them at 3 in the afternoon, she was exhausted but satisfied. This was work that mattered, work that would make a difference in these children's lives. The week passed quickly as Caroline settled into a routine. She taught Monday through Friday, spent her evenings preparing lessons and grading work, and her Sundays at church and exploring the town. She wrote letters to a few friends in Philadelphia, describing her new life with a mix of honesty and optimism. The work was hard, but she found it fulfilling in a way her previous life had never been. She did not see Corrigan, though she found herself looking for him every time she walked through town. She told herself it was silly to think about a man she had met for barely 15 minutes, but she could not seem to help it. Something about that brief encounter had stayed with her, lodged somewhere deep in her chest. Nearly 3 weeks after her arrival, Caroline was walking home from the schoolhouse on a Friday afternoon when she heard her name called. She turned to see a familiar figure leading a horse down the main street. Her heart gave an unexpected jump. Corrigan looked much as he had when she met him, dusty and work-worn, but he smiled when he saw her. It was less shy this time, more genuine. "Miss Hartwell. I heard you made it to Abilene safe and sound." "Mr. Corrigan," Caroline said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "Yes, I have been here for almost 3 weeks now. The teaching is going well." "Just Corrigan, remember?" he said, stopping a few feet away. His horse nuzzled his shoulder and he reached up absently to pat its neck. "I am glad to hear it. The town has needed a good teacher." "What brings you to Abilene?" Caroline asked, wanting to keep him talking to hear his voice again. "Supplies for the ranch," Corrigan said, gesturing to the general store behind her. "We come into town every few weeks to stock up. My brother is settling the account now." He hesitated, then added, "I was hoping I might run into you, actually." Caroline felt warmth spread through her chest. "You were," Corrigan looked down at his boots, and that faint color rose in his cheeks again. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in all right, and to see if maybe you would like to have supper with me sometime. At the hotel restaurant," he added quickly. "Nothing improper, just supper." Caroline's smile felt like it might split her face. "I would like that very much." The relief on Corrigan's face was endearing. "Tomorrow evening, I could come by your boarding house at 6. Tomorrow would be perfect," Caroline said. They stood there for a moment, grinning at each other, until a voice called out from the general store. "Corrigan, you going to help load this wagon or just stand there all day?" Corrigan glanced over his shoulder. "That is my brother, Patrick. I should go, but I will see you tomorrow at 6. "I will be ready," Caroline promised. She watched him lead his horse toward the store, where a man who looked enough like him to be his twin was leaning against a loaded wagon with an amused expression. As Corrigan approached, his brother said something Caroline could not hear, and Corrigan shoved him lightly, but he was smiling. Caroline walked back to the boarding house feeling lighter than she had in months. When Martha saw her face, she raised an eyebrow. "You look like you just received good news." "I have been invited to supper," Caroline said, unable to contain her smile. "Tomorrow evening." "By that cowboy who brought you back to the station when you first arrived?" Martha asked shrewdly. "Tom mentioned seeing you ride in with him." "James Corrigan," Caroline confirmed. "Do you know him?" "The Corrigan boys are well respected around here," Martha said. "Their father built the double R from nothing, and they have kept it going since he passed. Corrigan is the older brother, very responsible, very hardworking. Quiet, but in a thoughtful way. You could do much worse." Caroline felt her cheeks heat. "It is just supper, Martha," Martha smiled. "Of course it is, dear. But if you want to borrow my green dress, the one with the lace collar, it would look lovely on you." The next day seemed to last forever. Caroline tried to occupy herself with chores and lesson planning, but her mind kept drifting to the coming evening. When it was finally time to prepare, she accepted Martha's offer of the green dress, which did indeed fit her well and brought out the color of her eyes. She arranged her hair carefully, leaving a few soft curls around her face, and pinned her mother's pearl necklace at her throat. When Corrigan knocked on the door at precisely 6 o'clock, Caroline had to take a deep breath before going downstairs to meet him. He had cleaned up from his ranch work, wearing dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that looked like it might be saved for special occasions. His hair was still damp from washing, and he held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly, and he seemed to forget how to speak for a moment. "Miss Hartwell," he finally managed, "you look beautiful." "Thank you," Caroline said, feeling a flutter in her stomach. "You look very nice as well." They walked to the hotel in the soft light of early evening, making slightly awkward conversation about the weather and the town. But once they were seated in the restaurant and had ordered their meals, the awkwardness began to fade. "Tell me about the double R," Caroline said. "What is it like running a ranch?" Corrigan leaned back in his chair, seeming more comfortable with this topic. "It is hard work, but good work. We run about 3,000 head of cattle, drive them to the railroad here in Abilene every fall. The rest of the year is breeding, caring for the herd, maintaining the property. We have about 15 hands working for us, good men mostly. Patrick handles more of the business side, the accounts, and deals with buyers. I prefer being out with the cattle and horses. You grew up there?" Caroline asked. "Since I was 5, Corrigan said. "My father brought us out from Missouri after my mother died. He wanted a fresh start, same as you. He claimed the land and built everything from the ground up. I learned to ride before I could read properly." He smiled at the memory. "Patrick and I used to race our horses across the prairie until our father would yell at us for running them too hard." "It sounds like a good childhood," Caroline said softly. "It was," Corrigan agreed. "Hard sometimes, but good. What about you? What was Philadelphia like?" Caroline hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Very different from here. I grew up in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood. My father was a merchant, quite successful for many years. I went to school, learned piano and painting, all the things young ladies are supposed to learn. But then my mother got sick and died when I was 18. My father took it hard and started drinking. His business failed, and when he died last year, there were debts. I sold everything to pay them and was left with very little. A friend saw the advertisement for a teacher in Abilene and suggested I apply, so here I am." Corrigan's expression was sympathetic. "That takes courage, coming all this way alone to start over." "Or desperation," Caroline said with a rueful smile. "Courage," Corrigan repeated firmly. "I have seen grown men who would not have made that journey." Their food arrived, and they ate while the conversation drifted to lighter topics. Corrigan asked about her students, and Caroline found herself telling stories about the children, their personalities and quirks. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the funny moments. In turn, he told her about life on the ranch, about the cattle drives and the unpredictable nature of working with animals and weather. "There was this one time," he said, his eyes crinkling with amusement, "when Patrick decided he could break this wild Mustang we had caught. He was maybe 17, full of confidence. I told him the horse was too mean, but he would not listen. Lasted about 3 seconds in the saddle before that horse bucked him clear into a water trough." Caroline laughed, imagining it. "Was he hurt?" "Only his pride," Corrigan said, grinning. "He smelled like horse for a week, and every hand on the ranch gave him grief about it. He has been more careful since." As the evening wore on, Caroline realized she was enjoying herself more than she had in years. Corrigan was easy to talk to once he relaxed, with a dry sense of humor and a thoughtful way of listening. He asked her opinion about things and seemed genuinely interested in her answers. There was none of the posturing or empty flattery she had endured from suitors in Philadelphia. This was real conversation, honest and warm. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun had set and stars were beginning to appear in the vast prairie sky. Corrigan walked her back to the boarding house slowly, and Caroline found herself wishing the distance was longer. At the door, Corrigan stopped and turned to face her. In the lamplight spilling from the windows, his eyes looked very blue. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said quietly. "So did I," Caroline said. "Thank you for inviting me." "Could I see you again?" Corrigan asked. "Maybe next Sunday I could take you for a ride, show you some of the prairie." "If you would like." "I would like that very much," Caroline said, meaning it with her whole heart. Corrigan smiled, that shy, crooked smile she was coming to adore, and touched the brim of his hat. "Sunday afternoon, then. I will pick you up at 1 o'clock. Caroline watched him walk away into the darkness, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating far too fast. When she went inside, Martha was waiting with a knowing smile. "Good evening," the older woman asked. "The best," Caroline said softly. Sunday afternoon arrived sunny and warm, perfect weather for a ride. Caroline dressed in her most practical outfit, a simple brown riding skirt and white blouse, and tied her bonnet securely under her chin. She did not want a repeat of their first meeting. Corrigan arrived promptly with 2 horses, his bay and a sweet-tempered mare he introduced as Clover. "She is gentle," he assured Caroline, "perfect for someone who is still learning to ride." "I should tell you I have never actually ridden a horse properly," Caroline admitted. "I only sat behind you that once," Corrigan's eyebrows rose. "Never. Well then, first lesson. Come here." He spent the next 20 minutes teaching her the basics, how to mount, how to sit in the saddle, how to hold the reins, how to signal the horse to walk or stop. Caroline proved an attentive student, though she felt awkward and unbalanced at first. Corrigan was patient, demonstrating techniques and offering encouragement. "You are doing fine," he said when she managed to walk Clover in a circle around the yard. "Natural even." "I feel like I am going to fall off," Caroline said, gripping the saddle horn perhaps more tightly than necessary. "You will not. Clover is steady and I will be right beside you the whole time." Ready to see the prairie, they rode out of town at a walk, Corrigan keeping his horse close to hers. Caroline gradually relaxed as she got used to the rhythm of Clover's movements, and by the time they had gone a mile, she was actually enjoying herself. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, the grass rippling in the wind like water, dotted here and there with wildflowers. "It is beautiful," Caroline said, looking around in wonder. "So much space." "It grows on you," Corrigan said. "Some people find it too empty, too lonely, but I have always loved it. You can breathe out here." He led her to a spot where a creek wound through the grass, bordered by a few cottonwood trees. They dismounted and let the horses drink while they sat in the shade. Corrigan had brought a canteen of water and some biscuits Martha had insisted on packing, and they shared the simple meal. "Can I ask you something?" Caroline said after a while. "Anything," Corrigan replied. "When you chased down my bonnet, what made you do it? You did not know me, you could have just ridden past." Corrigan was quiet for a moment, considering. I saw you standing there looking so distressed. And I thought about how hard it must have been, coming all this way alone, and how that bonnet probably meant something to you. I just wanted to help." He glanced at her. "Also, you looked like you were about to twist your ankle running in those city shoes." Caroline laughed. "I probably would have." "It was foolish to chase it so far." "Not foolish," Corrigan said gently. "It was important to you. That is reason enough." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind and the creek and the occasional bird call. Caroline felt more at peace than she had in a long time, and she realized it was not just the beauty of the place but the man beside her. There was something about Corrigan that made her feel safe and valued, something she had not felt in years. "Caroline," Corrigan said suddenly, using her first name for the first time. "Can I be honest with you about something?" Her heart skipped. "Of course." "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that day at the station," he said, staring at the creek as if the words were easier if he was not looking at her. "I know we have only just met, and maybe it is too soon to say this, but I want to spend more time with you. I want to know everything about you. I want to see you smile and hear you laugh. I have never felt like this before." Caroline's breath caught. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I thought maybe I was being silly, letting my imagination run away with me. But I think about you all the time, Corrigan. I have since the moment you handed me my bonnet with that smile." Corrigan finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her heart race. "Can I court you properly? I know I am just a rancher and you are educated and cultured, but I will do my best to make you happy." "You are not just a rancher," Caroline said firmly. "You are kind and thoughtful and genuine. You have already made me happier than I have been in years. And yes, you can court me." "I would be honored." The smile that spread across Corrigan's face was brilliant, transforming his features. Without thinking, Caroline reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady, and they sat there holding hands in the shade of the cottonwood trees while the prairie wind whispered around them. Over the next few months, Corrigan came to Abilene every Sunday without fail. Sometimes they went for rides, and Caroline became increasingly comfortable in the saddle. Other times they attended church together and had dinner afterward. Occasionally they simply walked through town, talking about everything and nothing. The townspeople grew accustomed to seeing them together, and Martha teased Caroline gently about the cowboy who was clearly smitten with her. Caroline learned more about Corrigan with each visit. She learned that he was fiercely loyal to the people he cared about, that he had a way with animals that bordered on magical, that he worried about the future of the ranch and his responsibilities to his workers. She learned that his favorite meal was steak and potatoes, that he had a weakness for apple pie, that he could not carry a tune but loved listening to music. She learned that he had a temper but rarely showed it, that he hated injustice, that he believed in treating everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. In turn, she told him about her life in Philadelphia, about her mother's gentleness and her father's pride, about her love of books and learning, about her fears and hopes for the future. She told him things she had never told anyone, and he listened without judgment, offering comfort when she needed it and silence when that was better. By the time summer gave way to fall, Caroline knew she was in love with James Corrigan. It was not the dramatic, overwhelming passion of novels, but something deeper and more solid, built on respect and trust and genuine affection. She loved the way he looked at her like she was precious, the way he made her laugh, the way his presence made everything seem better. One Sunday in late September, Corrigan arrived with an invitation. "The fall roundup is next week," he said. "We will be bringing the herd in from the summer pastures and getting them ready for the drive to the railroad. I was hoping you might come out to the ranch to see it. Patrick and I would like you to meet the hands, see where I spend most of my time. You could stay a few days at the house. We have a spare room and Mrs. Chen, our cook, would be there as a chaperone." Caroline's eyes widened. "You want me to visit the ranch?" "I want you to see my home," Corrigan said simply. I want you to understand my life, what it would be like if, he trailed off, but the implication hung in the air between them. I would love to come, Caroline said, her heart pounding. School has a break next week for the harvest. I could come on Monday and stay until Thursday. The smile on Corrigan's face told her she had given the right answer. The following Monday, Caroline packed a small bag and waited outside the boarding house. Corrigan arrived mid-morning driving a wagon, and he helped her up onto the seat beside him. The ride to the Double R took about 2 hours, following a well-worn trail north across the prairie. As they approached the ranch, Caroline saw it was larger than she had imagined. The main house was a sprawling structure of wood and stone with a wide porch and multiple additions. Nearby were several barns, corrals, a bunkhouse for the hands, and various other outbuildings. Cattle dotted the landscape as far as she could see, and she could hear men shouting and the lowing of animals. Corrigan pulled the wagon up to the main house, where a man who looked very much like him came out to greet them. Patrick Corrigan was slightly shorter than his brother and a bit stockier, with the same dark hair but brown eyes instead of blue. His smile was easy and welcoming. "You must be the famous Miss Hartwell," Patrick said, helping her down from the wagon. "Corrigan has talked about nothing else for months. Welcome to the Double R." "Thank you for having me," Caroline said, liking him immediately. A tiny Chinese woman emerged from the house, her weathered face creased in a smile. "This is the teacher girl," she said in accented English. "Very pretty." "You feed her, Corrigan. She is too thin," Corrigan laughed. "Mrs. Chen, this is Caroline Hartwell. Caroline, Mrs. Chen has been cooking for us since my father's time. She keeps us all in line." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive gesture. "Someone has to. Come, I show you room, then we have lunch." The inside of the house was comfortable and masculine, with sturdy furniture and few decorations. Mrs. Chen led Caroline upstairs to a small but pleasant guest room with a window overlooking the corrals. "You rest, you wash, you come down when ready," she instructed. "Boys are working, but they will be back soon." Caroline freshened up and changed out of her traveling clothes, then went downstairs to explore. She found the kitchen where Mrs. Chen was preparing an enormous meal, a living room with a stone fireplace and shelves of books, and a dining room with a table that could seat 20. Everything was clean but lived in, practical but cared for. Lunch was indeed enormous. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie. Corrigan and Patrick came in dusty and tired, washing up at the pump outside before joining her and Mrs. Chen at the table. The conversation was lively, Patrick regaling her with stories about the ranch and asking about her teaching, Mrs. Chen interjecting comments and scolding the brothers when they tried to take seconds before Caroline had finished. After lunch, Corrigan took her on a tour of the property. He showed her the barns where they stored feed and equipment, the stables where the horses were kept, the corrals where they would sort the cattle. He introduced her to some of the hands, men with sun-weathered faces who treated him with obvious respect. She met Sam, the foreman who had worked for Corrigan's father, Hector, a young Mexican cowboy with a quick smile, and old Joe, who claimed to be 70 but looked older and had endless stories about the early days of the ranch. "This is what my father built," Corrigan said as they stood on a rise overlooking the main compound. "This is what Patrick and I are trying to preserve and grow. It is not fancy, but it is honest work and it matters." "It is wonderful," Caroline said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you have here." That evening, after a dinner that was somehow even larger than lunch, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie. Patrick had excused himself to go over accounts, and Mrs. Chen had retired to her quarters behind the kitchen, leaving Caroline and Corrigan alone in the gathering dusk. "Thank you for bringing me here," Caroline said quietly. "I understand now why you love it so much. Do you think you could love it too?" Corrigan asked, and there was vulnerability in his voice that made her heart ache. Caroline turned to look at him. "I could love any place as long as you were there." Corrigan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Caroline, I know we have only been courting for a few months, but I am sure about us. I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you chasing that bonnet across the prairie, so determined and brave. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me." Tears pricked Caroline's eyes. "I love you too, Corrigan, so very much." "Then marry me," he said, turning to face her fully. "I do not have a ring yet, and this is not very romantic, but I cannot wait any longer to ask. Marry me, Caroline, be my wife, help me build a life here. I promise I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "Yes," Caroline said, the word coming out somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Yes, I will marry you." Corrigan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Caroline buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid strength of his embrace. When he finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. They sat on the porch for hours, making plans and dreaming aloud. They would marry in the spring, Corrigan said, after the winter had passed and before the busiest time at the ranch. Caroline could continue teaching if she wanted, or she could help with the ranch accounts and administration. They would live in the main house with Patrick and Mrs. Chen until they could build their own home on the property. They would have children, hopefully, and raise them the way Corrigan had been raised, with hard work and love and connection to the land. "Are you sure about giving up your school?" Corrigan asked at one point. "I know teaching is important to you." Caroline considered this. "The children need a teacher, but perhaps by spring another one can be found, or perhaps I could teach part-time a few days a week. We will find a way to make it work. The important thing is that we will be together." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Caroline watched the roundup, amazed by the skill and coordination required to gather and sort thousands of cattle. She helped Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, learning to cook for a large group and listening to stories about Corrigan's childhood. She spent time with Patrick, who teased her mercilessly but with obvious affection, clearly thrilled that his brother had found happiness. And she spent every possible moment with Corrigan, learning more about the daily operations of the ranch, riding beside him as he checked on various parts of the property, simply being near him. On her last evening at the ranch, Corrigan took her out to watch the sunset from a hilltop overlooking the entire spread. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange and gold, and the cattle were dark shapes against the grass below. "My father used to bring me here when I was a boy," Corrigan said. "He would tell me that this land was my legacy, that it was my responsibility to care for it and make it prosper. I always understood that in terms of the ranch, the cattle, the business. But now I understand it differently. A legacy is not just about land or money. It is about building something that matters, something you can pass down. I want to build that with you, Caroline. A real legacy of family and love." Caroline leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. "We will build it together," she promised. When Corrigan took her back to Abilene the next day, Caroline felt like she was leaving home rather than returning to it. But she had responsibilities to fulfill, students to teach, and plans to make. They agreed that Corrigan would come to town the following Sunday, and they would formally announce their engagement. The news spread through Abilene like wildfire. Martha was delighted, immediately beginning to plan for the wedding. The townspeople congratulated Caroline, and some of the older women offered advice about marriage and ranch life. The school board was disappointed that they would lose their teacher but understanding, and they agreed to let her finish out the school year. Corrigan came to town every weekend through the fall, and whenever possible, Caroline went out to the ranch. She was learning to truly ride now, not just sit on a horse but actually control it, and Corrigan was teaching her to rope and other ranch skills. She was also learning the business side from Patrick, understanding the accounts and the markets and the complex economics of running a cattle operation. In November, Corrigan presented her with a ring, a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. "It was my mother's," he said as he slipped it onto her finger. My father kept it all these years, and when he died, he left it to me. He said to give it to the woman I loved, the one who would help me build a life. I think he would have liked you very much." Caroline wore the ring with pride, and whenever she looked at it, she thought about the family she was joining, the legacy she was becoming part of. Winter came to the Kansas prairie, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The ranch work slowed but never stopped, and Caroline worried about Corrigan working in the harsh weather. He assured her he was fine, that he had weathered many winters, but she still felt relief every Sunday when he arrived in town safe and sound. They spent their time together planning for the wedding and their future. They decided to marry on the first Saturday in April at the church in Abilene. It would be a simple ceremony followed by a celebration at the ranch with food and music and dancing. Mrs. Chen was already planning the menu, and Martha was helping Caroline make her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of ivory silk and lace. Christmas came, and Corrigan invited Caroline to spend it at the ranch. She brought gifts she had made or purchased: a warm scarf she had knitted for Corrigan, a new ledger book for Patrick, embroidered tea towels for Mrs. Chen. They gave her gifts in return: a beautifully tooled leather journal from Patrick, a warm shawl from Mrs. Chen, and from Corrigan, a pair of riding boots custom-made to fit her perfectly. "So you can ride properly," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You are going to need them." They spent Christmas Day together, attending a small service that the circuit preacher held at the ranch for the hands, then sharing a magnificent dinner that Mrs. Chen had been preparing for days. In the evening, someone brought out a fiddle, and they pushed back the furniture in the living room and danced. Corrigan was not a graceful dancer, but he was enthusiastic, and Caroline laughed until her sides ached as he spun her around the room. Later, when they were alone on the porch despite the cold, Corrigan held her close. "This time next year you will be my wife," he said wonderingly. "We will spend Christmas in our own home, maybe with our own child on the way. I can hardly believe it." "I can," Caroline said, snuggling closer. "It is all I have dreamed about since the day I met you." The winter gradually gave way to spring. The prairie began to green up, wildflowers appeared, and the days grew longer and warmer. Caroline finished the school year, and the board hired a new teacher to start in the fall, a young woman from Missouri. Caroline spent her last day of teaching fighting tears as she said goodbye to her students, but she knew this was the right choice. Her future was at the Double R with Corrigan. The week before the wedding was a whirlwind. Relatives arrived from Missouri, friends of the Corrigan family from neighboring ranches. Martha's boarding house was full to bursting, and the hotel had every room occupied. Mrs. Chen and a team of women worked around the clock preparing food. The ranch was cleaned and decorated, and a platform was built in the yard for the dancing that would follow the ceremony. Caroline barely saw Corrigan in those last few days, as he was busy with preparations and entertaining guests. But the night before the wedding, he came to the boarding house and asked Martha if he could have a few minutes alone with Caroline on the porch. Martha agreed, though she left the door open to preserve propriety. "I wanted to see you," Corrigan said, taking Caroline's hands. "I wanted to make sure you are certain about this, that you are not having second thoughts." "No second thoughts," Caroline said firmly. "Only excitement and joy. Are you having doubts?" "Not even a little," Corrigan said. "I just want to make sure you know what you are getting." Ranch life is hard, Caroline. There will be long days and difficult times. The weather can be brutal, the work is never done, and there are no guarantees in this business. I want you to be happy, and I worry that you are giving up too much. Caroline reached up to touch his face. "I am giving up nothing that matters and gaining everything I have ever wanted. I love you, Corrigan. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life brings. We will face it together." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, until Martha cleared her throat loudly from the doorway. They broke apart, laughing, and Corrigan touched his forehead to hers. "Tomorrow you will be my wife. I can hardly wait." "Tomorrow," Caroline echoed, her heart full to bursting. Her wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the sky an endless blue and the temperature perfect. Martha and Mrs. Chen helped her dress, fussing over every detail of her appearance. The dress fit perfectly, the ivory silk complementing her coloring, the lace at the collar and cuffs delicate and beautiful. She wore her mother's pearls and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Corrigan had picked himself. The church was packed with people from Abilene and the surrounding ranches. Caroline walked down the aisle on Patrick's arm, as he had offered to give her away since she had no family present. But she only had eyes for Corrigan, standing at the front in a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes locked on her with an expression of such love and awe that it took her breath away. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Corrigan he could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, and the congregation erupted in applause. The celebration at the ranch was everything Caroline had hoped for. Tables groaned under the weight of Mrs. Chen's cooking. The fiddle player was joined by a man with a guitar and another with a harmonica, and the music filled the air. Everyone danced, from the oldest rancher to the youngest child. Corrigan whirled Caroline around the platform again and again until they were both dizzy and laughing. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Corrigan pulled her aside. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Caroline said. "This is the best day of my life." "Mine too," Corrigan said. "And it is just the beginning." They stayed at the party until late, but eventually they slipped away to the small house that had been built for them over the winter, a surprise Corrigan and Patrick had been working on in secret. It was not large, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Inside, Mrs. Chen had left a fire burning in the hearth and a simple supper on the table. Flowers were everywhere, filling the space with color and fragrance. Caroline walked through the rooms, touching the furniture that Corrigan had built with his own hands, looking at the curtains Mrs. Chen had sewn, feeling overwhelmed by the love that had gone into creating this space for them. When she returned to the main room, Corrigan was watching her with nervous anticipation. "Do you like it?" he asked. "I love it," Caroline said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you. I love all of this. Thank you for giving me a home, a real home." Corrigan crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "This is our home now, yours and mine. We are going to fill it with love and laughter and someday with children. We are going to build a beautiful life here, Caroline. I promise you that." And he kept that promise. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, learning to live together, to navigate the challenges of ranch life, to build their partnership. There were difficult moments, times when the work was overwhelming or money was tight, or they simply disagreed about something. But they faced everything together, and their love only grew stronger. Caroline did continue to teach, riding into town 3 days a week to help at the school. She also took over much of the ranch's bookkeeping, as she had a head for numbers and organization that impressed Patrick. She learned to cook from Mrs. Chen, to tend a garden, to care for chickens and preserve food for the winter. She became skilled at riding and even learned to rope cattle, though she left most of the heavy ranch work to Corrigan and the hands. Their second spring together brought joyous news. Caroline was expecting a child. Corrigan was over the moon, alternating between excitement and worry, fretting over Caroline's health and comfort. She bore his hovering with good humor, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in December 1879, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Thomas James Corrigan, after both their fathers, and he was doted on by everyone at the ranch. Corrigan was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle before he could even walk. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Elizabeth Ann, who had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination. And 2 years after that, another son, William Patrick, named for Corrigan's brother who had married and started his own family on an adjoining property. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and family. The ranch prospered under the Corrigan brothers' management, and they were able to expand their holdings and improve their stock. Caroline's students thrived, and she loved seeing them grow and learn. The small house that had seemed so perfect when they married soon proved too small for their growing family, and they added on rooms until it was a proper home. Caroline and Corrigan's love continued to deepen as the years went by. They still rode out together when they could, just the two of them, to watch the sunset from their special hilltop or to sit by the creek where he had first asked to court her. They still held hands, still looked for each other first in any crowd, still made each other laugh. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Corrigan surprised Caroline with a gift, a beautiful new bonnet, far fancier than anything she would ever need on a ranch, with ribbons and lace and silk flowers. "What is this for?" Caroline asked, laughing as she tried it on. "So I can chase it across the prairie again," Corrigan said with that same shy grin she had fallen in love with years ago. "That is where our story started, after all, you chasing your bonnet and me chasing you." "You caught more than a bonnet that day," Caroline said, pulling him close. "I caught everything I ever wanted," Corrigan replied. Their children grew up strong and healthy, learning the ways of the ranch and the value of hard work. Thomas was steady and reliable like his father, Elizabeth was spirited and clever, and William was gentle and thoughtful. They were good children who grew into good adults, and Caroline and Corrigan were proud of the family they had built. Patrick and his wife had children too, and the Double R became truly a family enterprise, with cousins working side by side, learning from their fathers and from old Joe, who lived to be 92 and claimed that the prairie air was the secret to long life. Mrs. Chen stayed with them for many years before peacefully passing in her sleep, and Caroline took over as the primary cook for the family, using the recipes and techniques the older woman had taught her. As they aged, Caroline and Corrigan remained devoted to each other. Their hair turned gray, their faces lined with years of sun and wind, but their love never dimmed. They took to sitting on the porch of their home in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, holding hands just as they always had. "Do you ever regret it?" Corrigan asked one evening when they were in their 60s. "Leaving Philadelphia, giving up the life you knew?" Caroline looked at him in surprise. "Not for a single moment. That life was never really mine. This is where I was meant to be with you. Every good thing in my life came from the moment my bonnet blew off and you chased it down. You gave me everything, Corrigan. You gave me everything," he corrected. "You took a lonely cowboy and made him the happiest man alive. You gave me a home filled with love, beautiful children, a life worth living. I thank God every day that the wind blew your bonnet off and I was there to catch it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the prairie they both loved, the land their family had built a legacy on. Their children and grandchildren were inside preparing dinner, their voices and laughter drifting out through the open windows. The cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a horse whinnied. The wind rustled through the grass. That same prairie wind that had brought them together so many years ago. Caroline thought back to that frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Abilene, not knowing what her future held, only hoping for a fresh start. She could never have imagined then how blessed that future would be, how much love and joy awaited her. All because a shy cowboy had chased down her bonnet and returned it with a grin that changed her life. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Corrigan squeezed her hand gently. "Ready to go in for supper in a moment," Caroline said. "I want to stay here just a little longer with you watching our world." "Our world," Corrigan repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." And there they sat, the schoolteacher from Philadelphia and the Kansas rancher, hands clasped, hearts entwined, surrounded by the life and love they had built together on the wide prairie under the endless sky. It had all started with a bonnet and the wind and a young man who had not hesitated to chase what was important. And it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a love story that would be told by their descendants for generations to come. The years continued to roll by like the prairie grass in the wind. Thomas took over more of the daily operations of the ranch, working alongside his father until Corrigan finally admitted that maybe it was time to step back a bit. Elizabeth married a banker from Abilene, a good man who respected her intelligence and drive, and they settled in town where she became an advocate for women's education and helped establish a library. William found his calling as a veterinarian, studying in Kansas City before returning to serve the ranching community, his gentle nature perfect for working with animals. Caroline and Corrigan became great-grandparents, watching with joy as their family continued to grow and flourish. They took pride in seeing how their descendants carried on the values they had worked so hard to instill: honesty, hard work, compassion, and love for the land and each other. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw an enormous celebration at the ranch. People came from all over Kansas, some who had known Corrigan's father, others who had been Caroline's students decades ago, now grown with children of their own. The party lasted all day and into the night, with speeches and toasts and stories about the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. When it was Corrigan's turn to speak, he stood with Caroline beside him, his arm around her waist, and looked out at the sea of faces, his family and friends. His voice was still strong despite his 76 years. "Most of you know the story of how Caroline and I met," he began. "Her bonnet blew off, I chased it down and gave it back to her. Simple as that. But what you might not know is that in that moment, when I saw her standing there in the prairie wind, something in my heart recognized something in hers. I think I knew, even then, that she was going to be my whole world." He turned to look at Caroline, his eyes still that remarkable blue-gray, still filled with love. "50 years ago, I promised to love you and honor you for the rest of my life. It has been the easiest promise I ever kept. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love, my everything. You made me better than I ever could have been alone. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for every single day." There was not a dry eye at the celebration, and when Corrigan kissed his wife, everyone cheered. Caroline held him tightly, thinking about the journey they had traveled together, from that first meeting on the prairie to this moment surrounded by generations of love. They danced that night, slowly and carefully, but with all the joy they had felt on their wedding day. The music played and the stars shone, and Caroline rested her head on Corrigan's shoulder, exactly where it belonged. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winter came and went, then spring, then summer. Caroline and Corrigan continued their routine of morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks when the weather permitted, and evenings surrounded by family. They were slowing down, certainly their steps not as quick, their energy not what it once was, but their love remained constant. On a beautiful morning in May 1932, 53 years after they had first met, Corrigan woke to find the sun streaming through the bedroom window. He turned to look at Caroline, still asleep beside him, her hair white now but still beautiful to him. He watched her breathe, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had shared. When she woke, she smiled at him, that same smile that had captured his heart so long ago. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," he replied. "Did I ever tell you that you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen?" "Only about 1,000,000 times," Caroline said, laughing, "but I never tire of hearing it." They rose and dressed, helping each other with buttons and laces as they always did, and made their way to the kitchen where their grandson was already starting coffee. The ranch was in good hands now, the fourth generation preparing to take over, and Caroline and Corrigan could rest easy knowing their legacy would continue. After breakfast, Corrigan suggested a ride, and though Caroline protested that they were too old for such things, he insisted. They saddled 2 horses, moving slowly but surely, and rode out to their special hilltop, the place where Corrigan had first spoken to her about legacy, about building something that mattered. They sat in the grass, looking out over the vast spread of the Double R, watching cattle graze and seeing the various buildings and homes that now dotted the property. So much had grown from such humble beginnings. So much love had flourished from a single act of kindness on a windy prairie day. "I have been thinking," Corrigan said quietly, "about that day we met, about how easily it could have not happened. If I had been riding a different direction, if I had not seen your bonnet, if I had decided it was not my business to help. Our entire life together came down to that one moment, that one choice to chase after a piece of silk in the wind." "It was not the bonnet you were chasing," Caroline said wisely. "It was destiny, it was love, it was everything we were meant to be together. The bonnet was just the excuse." Corrigan smiled and took her hand. "You are probably right. You usually are." They sat there for a long time, two old people who had loved each other well, watching the land they had tended and the family they had raised, content in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful and lasting. When they finally rose to ride back, they did so slowly, savoring every moment, knowing that time was precious. Years continued to pass. They celebrated their 55th anniversary, then their 60th. Corrigan's health began to fail, and Caroline cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her. When he was confined to bed, she sat beside him, reading aloud or simply holding his hand, their fingers still naturally finding the familiar intertwining of decades. On a spring morning very much like the one when they had first met, Corrigan passed peacefully in his sleep, Caroline beside him. He was 85 years old and he had lived a full, rich life. The funeral was enormous, attended by what seemed like half of Kansas, all the people whose lives had been touched by this quiet, kind man who had built a legacy of love. Caroline grieved deeply, feeling like half of herself had been torn away. But she was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of Corrigan in their faces and their hearts. She found comfort in their presence, in the evidence of the life she and Corrigan had created together. She lived for 5 more years, spending her time with family, writing down stories of her life with Corrigan so that future generations would know the man he had been, the love they had shared. She tended a garden and taught her great-great-grandchildren to read and told anyone who would listen about the cowboy who had chased down her bonnet and captured her heart. On the anniversary of the day they had met, 63 years after a young woman's bonnet had blown off in the prairie wind, Caroline Hartwell Corrigan passed away peacefully in the home she and her husband had built together. She was 87 years old, and her last words were, "I am coming, my love." They buried her beside Corrigan on the hilltop where they had spent so many evenings watching the sunset, where he had first talked about legacy, where they had returned again and again throughout their life together. The headstone was simple James Corrigan Corrigan, 1851 to 1936, and Caroline Hartwell Corrigan, 1855 to 1940. Beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents. Their love was a gift to all who knew them, but their true memorial was not the stone marker. It was the thriving ranch that continued to operate, run by their descendants who honored the values they had instilled. It was the school in Abilene that bore Caroline's name, recognizing her years of service to education. It was the countless people whose lives had been touched by their kindness, their generosity, their example of what true love looked like. Most of all, their memorial was in the story that was told and retold through the generations, of how a young woman's bonnet blew off in the prairie wind, and a shy cowboy chased it down and returned it with a grin, and how that simple act of kindness blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It became a family legend, a reminder that the smallest gestures of compassion can change everything, that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that two souls can recognize each other even across the differences of background and experience. The Double R Ranch still stands today, though much has changed over the decades and centuries. But in the main house, There is a room that serves as a family museum, and in that room, carefully preserved under glass, is a faded blue silk bonnet with white ribbons. Beside it is a photograph of a young couple on their wedding day, she in ivory silk and lace, he in a new suit, both looking at each other with expressions of such love and joy that it takes your breath away even all these years later. And on the label beneath the bonnet it says simply, "Where it all began, May 1877. Visitors to the ranch often ask about the bonnet and the photograph, and whichever Corrigan descendant is giving the tour will smile and begin the story. Well, it was a windy day in May, and my great-great-great-grandmother was on her way to Abilene to become a schoolteacher. Her bonnet blew off, and my great-great-great-grandfather chased it across the prairie on horseback and returned it to her with a shy grin. And that was the beginning of the greatest love story our family has ever known. And the visitors will look at the bonnet, and the photograph and the obvious pride on the tour guide's face, and they will understand that this is not just a family's history, but a testament to something deeper and more important. It is a story about how love finds us when we least expect it, about how kindness and courage can change the course of a life, about how two people from different worlds can come together and build something beautiful that lasts long beyond their own years. The prairie wind still blows across Kansas, rustling through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and promise. And if you stand on that hilltop at sunset, looking out over the land that James and Caroline Corrigan built together, you can almost feel their presence, their enduring love woven into the very fabric of the place. You can imagine a young woman chasing her bonnet, a young man on horseback galloping after it, two souls about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime. And you can know with absolute certainty that their story proves what we all hope is true. That love is real, that it lasts, that it matters. That sometimes all it takes is a moment of courage, a simple act of kindness, and the willingness to say yes when life offers you an unexpected chance at happiness. Their story began with a bonnet and the wind and a shy grin. It grew into 50 years of marriage, a family that spanned generations, a legacy of love and hard work and commitment to each other and to the land. And it ended not with death but with continuation, with descendants who carry their blood and their values, with a love story that continues to inspire everyone who hears it. This is the story of Caroline Hartwell and James Corrigan, the teacher from Philadelphia and the Kansas cowboy, who met because of a bonnet and the prairie wind and built a love that would last forever. It is a story of the American West, of hard work and new beginnings, of courage and faith. But most of all, it is a story about love, true and deep and lasting, the kind of love that happens once in a lifetime if you are very lucky, the kind of love that changes everything. And it all started on a windy day in May 1877 when a bonnet blew off and a cowboy chased it, and two hearts recognized each other across the endless Kansas prairie. The beginning of forever, captured in a single moment, preserved in family legend, celebrated in every generation that came after. Their love was a gift, and the story of how it began is a gift too. A reminder that magic exists in the ordinary, that destiny can arrive on the wind, and that sometimes the best things in life start with the simplest gestures of kindness and compassion. James and Caroline Corrigan lived well, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that continues to this day, proving that one moment, one choice, one shy grin can indeed change everything. And somewhere in that family museum, preserved carefully beside the bonnet and the wedding photograph, is a journal that Caroline kept throughout her life. The first entry, dated May 1877, reads simply, "Today my bonnet blew off in the prairie wind and a cowboy chased it down and returned it to me with a shy grin. I think my life just changed forever." She was right. It did, and what a beautiful life it turned out to be.